There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Ellen Cassedy back. Ellen is joining us from New York City, and I had Ellen on my channel last year during Women in Translation Month to talk about at that time, new collection that she had translated, short stories translated from the Yiddish by the author Yenta Mash. I didn't know at that time that she wears a whole bunch of other fascinating hats, and she is here in anticipation of launching her latest book, which is a memoir about her, and I mean this in the most serious way possible, social justice warrior career as a feminist union activist. And the book is called Working 9 to 5, A Women's Movement, a Labor Union, and the Iconic Movie. Ellen, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's great to be here.
You teased us all when you were here last summer that this book was coming out, and now it is coming out September 6th from Chicago Review Press.
Correct.
Yes, well, and I have read it, and it is excellent. I think I'd like to start with a quote that you included at the beginning of your memoir that you used to have on your desk at the 9 to 5 office. And that was, "Through our great good fortune, in our youth, our hearts were touched with fire." I'd like you to kind of jump off from that point and introduce the book.
Yeah, so the book is a first-person account of what it was like to be 23 years old, a clerk typist at Harvard University. We got together, a bunch of us, and started talking about our jobs. And one thing led to another. And people had all kinds of problems with their jobs. In those days, pregnancy discrimination was perfectly legal. Sexual harassment was perfectly legal. Women were earning less than men, 57 cents to the dollar of what men earned. Women were doing all kinds of work outside their job descriptions, were asked to do all kinds of things by their bosses and had to do it. Office work was really kind of invisible because when people thought about a worker, what did they picture? A man with a hard hat wielding a wrench. And the 22 million women office workers in the economy at the time were just not on anyone's radar screen, if we had radar screens back then. So this was 50 years ago. And somehow from those early discussions of sitting around in a circle talking about what bothered us about our jobs, we took off. And we started a newsletter. This was in Boston, Massachusetts, 1973, and started passing it out. And we thought that we were on the brink of something really big. We felt like we really had our finger on the pulse of something huge, and we did. And so those beginnings, very simple, very much in tune with women starting to think about their jobs, sort of inflamed by the ideas of the women's movement and the civil rights movement, also inflamed by the economy, which made it just essential for women to get into the workforce. All that really took off. And I think I felt myself to be kind of an heir to the garment women of the turn of the 20th century. They were immigrant women. They were teenagers. Many of them spoke Yiddish. And they joined together. They went on strike by the tens of thousands. And they transformed their lives. They transformed the workplace. And they transformed the labor movement. And we 23-year-olds, full of beans, we thought, okay, today, look around, and who are the unsung workers, women workers of our economy that nobody notices? It's us. It's office workers. And maybe we can be part of that kind of history of women speaking up, joining together, linking arms in pursuit of common goals. And that's really what it was like.
One of the things that I loved about this memoir was that the most prevalent pronoun in the text is we. There are not so many I's, and I struggle with memoirs that are all me. So you really give credit that you were part of a movement and that it was a collaboration, and that showed the larger picture. And I really enjoyed that. I would like to focus on the I of the text a little bit. Tell us more about who you were in 1972, 73, including your family background.
Yeah, so I was 22, 23 years old. And my parents had really inculcated in me a feeling for my role in social justice. Wasn't necessarily called that back then, but we went to peace marches during the Vietnam War. We participated in fair housing initiatives in our community. We were a white family, we were middle class, but my parents felt it was very important to make common cause with people who didn't have as much, and who there was racism in society, there was sexism, and I grew up expecting to be part of, and I feel so privileged actually that the era in which I lived accommodated that and made it possible for me to be part of a movement. It's funny that you say this balance between I and we, because when I started writing this book, I thought about what was it that I wanted to read when I was really getting into being an activist and an organizer. And there wasn't a whole lot, there were not that many memoirs of what it really, really felt like to be working these long hours at an office and to be part of a team and just full of love for this team that you were working with. And to find yourself sitting around in meetings and words would come out of my mouth. And I thought, how did I ever think of that? And it was because of just the excitement of being with other people. So I think the I and the we, it was thrilling to become part of that we. And that's part of what I try to get across in this book.
Yes, the kind of memoir that a activist today might like to read. It's incredibly inspiring on that level. So partly because you show very clearly that this work, this cause, the strategies that develop, none of that came, or not very much of that came naturally to you and your collaborators.
When we started this organization, 9 to 5, we were very young, very green. We didn't know what we were doing. We sought out people to advise us. And some people were very generous with their time. And it felt to us that they'd just been waiting for us to show up. And it was very affirming. Other people were like, we tried that already. That's never going to work. Forget it. So we really, even though we were listening carefully to what our elders were saying, we really realized that we were going to have to follow our own noses. And we did. And part of, I think, what made us succeed and in taking on the corporate titans and winning millions of dollars in back pay and really changing the office culture was that we really, really listened. And that meant eating a lot of lunches with women we didn't know. So we had created this newsletter, and people would write in and say, I have that problem and this happens to me. We would call these people up, and then we would set out very systematically to go meet every single one of them. I sometimes ate 3 lunches in a day, and listen to how they talked about what their problems were, what those problems were. And we were very surprised. We had various preconceptions about who we were going to be meeting with and what they would say. For example, we thought women who were maybe less well put together, less well dressed would be the most interested in the organization, or people who were bored on their jobs. That was completely wrong. The people who wanted to join 9 to 5 cared deeply about their jobs and took their work very seriously. And what was bothering them was so frustrating because they couldn't get out of these lower level positions. They weren't taken seriously. They were referred to as my girl, 10 typing fingers. And they wanted more, and they wanted better for themselves. And that was a very revolutionary thing. That was a revolutionary moment when people start really feeling like, it doesn't have to be that way. Some of the challenges that faced us, one thing was that people tended to feel that if they were not happy on the job or if they hadn't gotten ahead, it was their fault. They should dress for success. They should take another class. They should speak up, be more assertive, and so on. And it was really our job to show people that this was really a systematic problem. It was not an individual problem. And that only by joining together could women on the job get what we deserved. Another problem was the authoritarian nature of the workplace. So there we were in Boston, sky-high towers, banks, insurance companies. The city ran on a paper economy, and it was women who kept the whole thing going. So women were working in these giant typing pools, and their supervisors could see everything that was going on. You could not leave your desk without permission. And people were terrified. They were scared to speak up. They were afraid of getting fired. They were not wrong. So those twin problems of the individualistic approach and the authoritarian nature of the job were the kinds of things that we had to struggle with, and struggle we did, but we found some ways to get around those problems.
And I related to this book as a former Kelly girl myself, and a secretary, and a legal secretary, paralegal before I got into other stuff. And also quite a bit of social activism in my past as well, within the queer movement. So I was particularly interested in how the strategies that you employed developed. And one of them was, at the very beginning, the meetings that you held, the office workers, they would come and they just wanted to vent. But as your organization evolved and your strategies evolved, you realized that the more needed to happen. How did that work, and how did that take shape?
Yeah, well, that's a very incisive point, because it's true that when I went to these lunches, sometimes people would just pour their hearts out, and that was all they were ready to do. That was all they were willing to do. That was sort of it for them. But what we had to do was somehow channel their frustration and anger and desire for revenge and desire to make more of their lives into actually winning things and making changes. And every time we did win something, we would publicize it so that other people would hear about it and realize, women would realize, maybe I could speak up. Maybe I don't need to just take this. And also employers began to realize, maybe I'd better change my behavior. One of the main ways we did this was through something we called the Petty Office Procedure Contest. So we put out the word that people should send us the worst thing they'd ever been asked to do on the job, the most annoying thing, the most frustrating, the most ridiculous. So the winner of the contest one year was a boss who had asked his secretary to sew up a hole in his trousers while he was wearing them. So we took a group of people on their lunch hour to his office, banged on the door, presented him with an executive sewing kit, and the Boston Globe was there, and the TV cameras were rolling. And things like this just put out the message, sent a signal to women, to bosses, that things had to change, and things did begin to change.
Absolutely. And that strategy started pretty early on in the history of 9 to 5. And you were there, we should say, from the dates of the newsletter, 1972, and co-founder of the organization, which came into being in 73. So you've been there for all of it. Later on in the development of 9 to 5, the organization, you talk about the multifaceted strategy: government pressure, whistleblowers, and public embarrassment. So there's the public embarrassment. So talk more about those three prongs of the multifaceted strategy.
Yeah. So one of the challenges, as I said, was women were really afraid to speak up, and I didn't have any experience doing that. And even something that we thought would be pretty easy, like taping up leaflets in the ladies' room, was beyond a lot of people. So we had to think up ways that people could have their voices heard without risking their jobs. And one way we did that was through the survey. So we would stand outside. One year we targeted the biggest bank in Boston, the First National Bank of Boston. We declared 1979 the year of the first. So we stood out there. We passed out a questionnaire. How is this going for you? How is that? Do you hear about jobs that are job openings through job posting? Are there career ladders? Is there job training? Do you get raises? Are you paid commensurate with your abilities, and so on? And people would anonymously fill out these forms. And then we set up a hotline for people to call, specifically for women from the First National Bank of Boston. People started calling and telling us things. Then we would take that information, put it on a leaflet, and we would be out there a couple of days later with feeding back to women what their coworkers were saying about their jobs. And within a couple of days of declaring the year of the first, the bank reversed itself on job posting. earlier, we had met with a manager who said, there's really no need for job posting. In fact, it would be a bad thing. The thing people need to do is just keep their eyes and ears open, because suppose we did post a job and someone didn't get it. Imagine how disappointed they'd be. It'd be terrible for morale. Well, this was just ridiculous. So a few days later, well, I guess we will do job posting. So by the end of a year, 51 women had been promoted to management jobs, and the bank gave a 12% raise, which is the biggest they'd ever given in history. So the ability to be a whistleblower, to call 9 to 5 and whisper, here's what's going on, was very important. And the public embarrassment of us standing outside the bank handing out these flyers was very important. And government pressure too. There was a sort of a robust enforcement structure in the federal government and state government. It wasn't being used. And so we would sort of track down these unused regulations and go in and say to the officials, look, it says right here on the books, here's what you can do it. And during some administrations, Democratic administrations, they did. And it scared the employers, and people and banks and insurance companies started making big changes.
Getting into line. We're going to talk about the movie in a minute, but at the end of the memoir, I'd like to read this quote in full. You're reflecting back and you're remembering maybe misgivings and self-doubt at the beginning of the journey. In the early years of our movement, I sat on a bluff looking up at a sky full of puffy clouds and contemplated the question of the duck and the wave. What if we activists were nothing more than ducks floating on the surface of the water, propelled by great economic and social forces over which we had no control? Could I, or any of us, really hope to influence the course of history? Beautiful quote, and tell us more about how you answer those questions.
I came to believe, I guess, two things. One was that every one of us has an impact on the world, on society, and everything you do, you never know what impact you're going to have on other people, what the effect will be of people seeing your example or reading about what you did in your book. And so there's always something that you can do to reach out to other people and try to make things better. And the other thing is I think it's really important to pursue that kind of thing with joy, and to find ways to be an activist, to make your mark on the world, find ways that really are pleasing to you and that really draw out the best of you. So it's not a question of just putting your nose to the grindstone and suffering your way through your life as an activist or an organizer. No. One of the things I really tried to get across in my book is how much fun we had, how much we loved each other.
There's an anecdote about a piano, I believe, that I remember quite vividly.
There were just these crazy things we did. Like we had an office that was about the size of a desk, and we had a co-tenant in there, and it was really crowded. So one day, my friend and I, my co-worker and I, we saw that there was an upright piano in the hall. We had an office at the YWCA. We thought, we moved the piano into this already completely crowded office. And then we hid and waited for our co-tenant to come and try to get into the office and, howled laughter. I mean, it's really silly. It was crazy. But we just had a ball, and we were dead serious. We thought we really dreamed of unionizing 20 million office workers. We did not succeed in doing that. We did start a woman-led union with the Service Employees International Union, which is a big growing union. They were very right on with us. They gave us our own charter. They let us start union drives wherever we wanted to. We had the entire country was our bailiwick, and we had these 3 or 4 organizers running around starting in 1980, organizing here and organizing there. We came up with all kinds of wacky tactics. It just so happened that that moment, 1980, was kind of a turning point in labor management relations, when employers looked at what we were doing and thought, no, we're not going with that. And the previous era of labor management cooperation that had sort of obtained from the end of the war on through the early 60s was really coming to an end, and global pressures were getting in the way, and inequality was rising hugely, and there was the rise of the anti-union consultant, the union buster. And by the end of the 80s, I think the AFL-CIO calculated that in 3/4 of union drives, these union busters would come in and just lay waste to a union drive. And the government helped them do it. And rights on the job, organizing rights, became more and more attenuated for workers. So we sort of hit things at the wrong time in history. But we really paved the way for all kinds of new directions in worker power. And you can see some of that today in with the challenges of today's economy, the gig economy and the warehouse jobs and so on. You see people organizing outside of the structures of the traditional labor unions and making progress. And I feel like that's the continuation of some of what we started.
You talk a lot in the book about how, yes, being part of the union movement is important, and working with elected cabinet ministers and so on is important, but also not to become subsumed within those strands of how to get things done, that you always are doing lots of other things as well to keep pushing the needle.
Yeah, that was something that somebody clued us into very early on. She said, these anti-discrimination agencies, they have huge backlogs. You'd be better off finding something else. And so what we tried to do was, we did use government a lot, but we'd sort of do a lot of research furtively, and we'd find these, as I said, laws that were on the books, but nobody was using them. So we would sort of come in from a surprising angle. Like, we'd ask the state treasurer to stop investing in a certain bank, stop depositing state funds in a certain bank, rather than going to the anti-discrimination agency. And we knew that simply filing a charge was just not the way for us, and we didn't. So more likely, we'd come up with these unexpected things. Like, for example, one university in the state of Washington, we made incredible progress through the use of the word Tampax. How did we do that? Well, they would the management negotiators at the bargaining table would be talking on about how they couldn't afford and our side would say, what's really bugging people is that you've removed the Tampax machines in the such and such buildings, and we want them back. And it turned out that just the use of that word, their faces would turn red, and some of the negotiators would have to leave the room. They were so uncomfortable. And having realized that, we were able to use that to great effect.
That's fantastic. So there's a lot of people that will find your book because of the movie. So tell us about the movie.
So the movie 9 to 5 was a 1980 box office hit. It has remained one of the 20 best-selling, biggest earning movies of all time. How did that happen? One of our early co-founders, Karen Nussbaum, had met Jane Fonda, the actor, during the anti-war movement, and they kept in touch. And Jane Fonda knew all about the boss who asked his trousers to be sewn up while he was wearing them, and the complaints about the pay being so low and being called my girl and all that. And she came to us and she said, I'd like to make a movie about what you're doing. And we were thrilled. So she brought her team to meet with a few dozen members of our organization, and things were a little stiff and things weren't really going anywhere. And then one member of her team asked this question that we had never thought to ask in any recruitment lunch that we had ever had, which was, have you ever thought about killing your boss? And the room, there was sort of a moment of silence, and then the room exploded, and people started saying these things like, I want a grind machine and pour him out and drip by drip. I want to send him out the window in his swivel chair. All of these fantasies went into the movie. we were very nervous about whether this movie was going to come out right, as were the studio moguls who thought, what, office workers? Have you ever seen a movie with an office worker as the main character? Well, there were very few, but this one really got it right. And the women were the focus of the show. They were the heroines of the show. When you laughed, you were laughing at the boss, at the secretary. And it really resonated with women who were really hungry to see themselves presented on the big screen. And the atmosphere in the movie theaters was completely electric. There's one scene where Jane Fonda, her first day of work, she's ushered into the copy room, and there's a great big photocopier there. It's her job to make the copies. So she's standing there, and it's sort of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, where the broom keeps bringing the buckets of water. So she's standing there, and papers come flying out of the little boxes on the photocopier, more and more and more and more, and she can't stop them, and she's starting to cry. And women would stand up in the audience of the theaters and say, push the stop button. So people were just absolutely over the moon seeing themselves presented there. And really, I think the movie was a turning point, because up to that point, you had to convince people that there was discrimination, that women didn't necessarily want to be called my girl and be passed over for promotion. But after that movie came out, that debate was over. And the new question was, what are we going to do about it? And Jane Fonda's partner, Bruce Gilbert, when the movie got going, he was quoted saying in the newspaper, he said, after this comes out, making coffee will never be the same. And he was right.
Should say that Jane Fonda has written foreword to your memoir, and also that Jane Fonda, being Jane Fonda, she didn't just make the movie. She kind of followed up with some of her own activist work that was adjacent to what 9 to 5 was doing, or maybe in conjunction with 9 to 5. But that she's Jane Fonda, so she doesn't just make movies. She wants to be part of that.
She was extraordinary. She was the most responsible celebrity I've ever heard of. She went on a speaking tour where she would show up in a city and announce a brown bag lunch for office workers. It would last 40 minutes. It was like $5, and you would go, and people, like 1,000 people would come. Or in San Francisco, 7,000 people came to hear her speak about the problems of office workers and secretaries. And she would wear this pink T-shirt that we had made. She was so modest in a way. She was asked, are you trying to light a fire under the desks in America's offices? And she said, no. Women office workers have lit that fire, and we're just fanning the flames. And let's not forget Dolly Parton. So Dolly Parton agreed to work to be part of the film. It was her first film appearance, on condition that she could write a song for it. And she wrote that fantastic song, Working 9 to 5, that has endured as an anthem. And it just encapsulates our whole movement. You've got the woman tumbling out of bed alone, and then gets to the office and realizes you're in the same boat with a lot of your friends, and then progresses on to just collective action. And it's inspiring, and it's toe tapping, and it's really did a lot.
I guess I'd like to close by saying that your heart is still very much touched with fire. And it comes through loud and clear in this memoir. And just like so much of the history of the organization that you co-founded and have been a part of ever since, there is a call to action that somebody who's interested in social justice issues and becoming more involved can't help but be spurred on to not just to read the story, relate to the story, find someone to vent to about their own experience, but to actually do something. It was a very active reading experience for me, and I expect for many another reader. So, Ellen, thank you so much for bringing the book into the world and telling us about it.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for all you do.